And welcome to this, the latest News live Facebook interview. Joined today by Gordon-Pamplin, the interim leader of the OBA. Thank you for sparing some time. It's great to see you here.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
There's one obvious question I've got to ask. And okay, hindsight's 2020, and looking back, it's maybe a bit obvious, but what went wrong? That was a pretty, the former Premier, Michael Dunkley, admitted it was a crushing defeat.
It absolutely was a crushing defeat. I think that, the one thing about the political process and the democratic process is that that is the one day that politicians get to say nothing and the people have the opportunity to have their voices heard. So very clearly, when they spoke, we had to listen. And what was very obvious was that the policies that we attempted to implement did not sit well, and people were tremendously disappointed. So clearly we just had to accept their voices and to go back to the drawing board. I believe that what's more important to us is that for the 4.5 years that we were the governing party, we did a lot to try to bring the country back from the brink of financial disaster. And I think that we were able to do that. I think sometimes when you don't say things as nicely as we have become accustomed to as Bermudians, you get punished for it. So you got to say, mother may I.
What do you mean by that? You don't say things as nicely. Are you saying you didn't communicate properly?
Our communication was dreadful. And that's no fault of anybody's, because I think as politicians, I think we are our best messenger, and to the extent that we failed to articulate the message that we wanted to get across, it's our responsibility.
That's a fairly basic thing to do, though. I mean, you can do all the politicking or all the economic fixing you want, but if you don't communicate your message, you're going to, as you saw, you're going to lose heavily at the election.
That's very true, and I think that we take full responsibility. There's no, in retrospect, hindsight's 2020 vision. Could we have done things differently? Could we have communicated differently? Absolutely. But the bottom line is that when you are focused and almost myopically focused on ensuring that the country doesn't go to hell in a handbasket, we were then really required to make sure that that was our message. And I think we did it, and I think we did it well.
The thing is, if you lose the election, though, you can't carry on those policies.
That's very true. You can only...
If you don't communicate, your policies have gone out the window.
That's very true. But, I think that for the time that we actually were at the helm, I think we had a lot of which we could have been tremendously proud. I think, in addition, that for the duration of our tenure, we found that we were constantly and consistently badgered by the then opposition, now the government, because I think that when they lost the 2012 election, I think there was a disappointment on their part because they were not able to fulfill the sense of entitlement that they were, it was theirs to govern. It belonged to them by some God-given inherent right. I think that what happens is that in 2012, the electorate rejected what they were doing. We came on board at a very, very difficult time for the country, certainly financially, and tried to do things to stabilize, to maintain the reputation for which Bermuda had become well known. And those policies that we brought on board obviously also didn't resonate. So the electorate have spoken again, and they've chosen to go back to what we saw in 2012 as a level of mediocrity, which is why they were rejected. But the electorate have chosen to go back to that. What's more important for me, though, and for us as a team, is to ensure that we will hold the new government accountable to the extent that what happened before was unacceptable, which is why they were trounced out in 2012. That there's going to be, well, they lost in 2012.
There was a much lower turnout.
we were trounced out in 2017.
There was very low turnout in 2012.
Yeah,
it was 1917. So.
Right, exactly. But they didn't win the election in 2012. And what I don't want to see is for us as a country to go back to that level of mediocrity that existed at that point in time.
Can couple of things there. I mean, you had to go at the PLP when they're in opposition for badgering you, but that's their job, isn't it, to badger the government?
I think it's their job to make sure that the government is held accountable, but I don't believe that it's their job to spread misinformation. And that was the hallmark of some of the things that they did while they were in office. And interestingly and unfortunately, a lot of the misinformation resonated. Our inability to counter that misinformation and to correct the facts as they were, obviously was our downfall. As I say, we take full responsibility for that. There's no excuse for it. We failed to communicate that level to the people.
The Premier, in a recent interview, I think, basically admitted, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, that the OBA didn't take account of the interest or communicate to the black population in particular.
We have a population that is predominantly black. So if they say that we didn't communicate to the black population, I don't believe that that's accurate.
Take their interests into account.
Absolutely we can, and we did as a government. I think that what the opposition was successful in doing is to say that the government chose to invest money in the America's Cup to the exclusion of the black population. And I think that the reality and the truth behind that is that we made an investment with the idea that there would be a return on investment, so that there was then money available to do some of the programs that they were screaming for. And that, I think, it's a valid concern. However, I think it was almost an unfair criticism to say that we failed to accept and recognize the black population, because as a government, we are required to govern for everybody.
How much of an issue were things like the airport, the pathways to status, etc.? How much of an issue do you think they played in the loss at the polls?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that was front and center. Pathways to status was not something that was well introduced, notwithstanding how well intentioned the idea was. It was not well introduced, and it was not sufficiently well communicated as to what the intent behind it was. Certainly the airport, very little difference between the airport deal, which was a 30-year build, manage, and finance, than the hospital, a 30-year build, manage, and finance. The one difference between the two projects was that with the hospital, it went out to tender. With the airport, it did not. But if you look at the reality of that situation, you have people around the world, tons of them building hospitals. You don't have tons of people willing to finance and build an airport. I think that the finance minister and the former deputy premier, Bob Richards, I think he did a sterling job. One of the things that we were required to do, that we promised that we would do in terms of creating jobs, is sometimes you have to go outside the norm of what people would have expected, to say that this is going to be a project that's going to create jobs for Bermudians. We saw that with the Berkeley Institute under the previous administration, where, notwithstanding how ill-advised we may have believed it to be, the government of the day chose to go forward with that project because it was going to provide jobs. What I find interesting is that the dynamics that were in play for one government, i.e. the PLP when they were in government, we were not allowed to have those same parameters when we were in the government. So,
job, though,
no, I don't think it is. I think that if you want to see your people working, and if that is your concern, then I think that to the extent that we have programs that are going to achieve that aim, I think they should be supported. And that's the one thing that I intend to do, that our team intends to do going forward. I think that what we found is that we were opposed just for the sake of opposition, not for the sake of the good of the country. If we were doing things where the country was not going to benefit, then they would certainly have been well within their right to have the levels of criticism that they meted upon us. However, we will not do that to them. We will give their policies the opportunity to work.
I was going to come on to the role of the opposition in a bit. I want to carry on about the reasons. I want to talk a little bit more about the reasons for the election result. You mentioned the pathways of status. It wasn't communicated to Jews properly. There was a certain perception, I think, that the OBA lacked empathy.
Let me just say this, that, we talk about the black population, we talk about the white population, we talk about, who's empathetic and who is not. Well, unless my mirror lied to me, I am very black. And if anybody could suggest to me for 1 second that I lack empathy for the people of Bermuda and for the challenges that we have as a country.
Not you personally,
no,
but the perception of the party.
And that is the unfortunate thing, because we had a membership, we had representation in the House of Assembly that was predominantly black, but somehow that gets lost in the message. Because the opposition have representation in the House that is 95% black, somehow it gets lost in the message. I'm not sure that I'm willing to accept the theory that white people need to be excluded from the equation. When you govern for everybody.
I'm going to come on to that a little bit later on, but talking about the leadership, the future leadership of the party. Just a couple more questions about the election. My understanding is you had a US consultant advising it. Was that a mistake?
I didn't get involved in the administration of the election and the consultations and things like that. Decisions were made, and they were the decisions that were made. Whether they were good, bad, or indifferent, obviously the result would suggest that maybe in retrospect you might have thought it differently. However, I think that at the time when the consultants were engaged, they were engaged with the best of intentions, and we accepted the advice that was given, and we just went on about our daily jobs, doing what was necessary to try to keep the country on even keel. And
you've had a couple of weeks or so to think about it. If you were to do anything differently next time, what would it be?
Well, I think that, when you have controversial decisions that have to be made, we can do one of two things. You can either pander to the electorate, you can, roll over and play dead, or you can face them head on. We chose to face some of the challenges that we had head on. I would not do anything differently in that respect. If you govern for the next election, you are effectively going to be castrated. If you govern because of what you deem to be right and appropriate, then even if it's rejected, you can go to bed at night knowing that you've given it your very best effort. That is what we intended to do.
That's sounds great. It sounds very honourable. The problem is when you lose, as I said before, you cannot carry on the policies you think are the correct ones for the country.
I agree.
So isn't there a sense of naivety there?
No, I don't think it's naivety. I think it's a question that if the electorate did not want for us to provide jobs for our people, if the electorate did not want for us to be able to have a long-term vision in terms of what we thought was a good fit for us going forward as a country, both in terms of balancing the population, the long-term residency issues. If the public felt that that's not what they wanted, then they had the option to be able to reject it, which is what they did. All I can say is that we gave it our very best effort while we were in government, and I will never regret the opportunity to serve. I don't look at our time in office as being one of entitlement. The only entitlement we have is the entitlement to offer ourselves to serve the people of Bermuda. And to the extent that the people of Bermuda rejected that level of service and decided that our time had come, that they wanted a different type of service, then that is theirs to determine. And I'm quite pleased, that we had that opportunity to engage in the democratic process.
You're the interim leader.
That is true.
What's the next step in the process? Is a party conference, presumably?
Yes, and that's the idea. What it is that the party leadership, or the leader of the party, has to have the support of the majority of the members of Parliament, as happens with the Premier. But our Constitution requires that the majority of our members, what the Constitution requires is that the party are the ones who make the determination as to who leads it. When you come out of an election and you have to be ready for the reopening of Parliament in very short order, it makes sense. You have to have a transition arrangement, and you have to have a continuity program. program. It made sense to me, as opposed to having any sort of internal struggle as to who the ideal person was, or leaving us in limbo while the conference is being called, to have somebody who has a little bit of parliamentary experience to step into the gap until such time as we have that opportunity.
So when will the conference be? When will the election be?
It's usually in October,
okay.
But between October and November, we're anticipating that that'll be done.
You expect to put your hat into the ring, do you?
No, that was not the intention. When I say that I wanted to be the interim leader, it would basically be so that those who are really keen and interested in carrying forward will have the opportunity to get their thoughts together, to get their programs together, to get their support base together, and their strategies together. I think that that's the important thing. But having stability for the party so that we're not left floundering, that we can be an effective opposition until such time as we have new leadership, I think is critical.
Why don't you want the leadership?
I think pragmatically, having served as long as I've served in Parliament, I think that you can reach a stage of being past your sell-by date. I think that what's important is to be able to have younger people there who will be able to carry the party forward. Obviously, I'm always going to be supportive, but to sort of continue to carry the mantle indefinitely, I just don't think it's wise or pragmatic.
And yet you're probably the most experienced politician left. You talk about a younger person, but that doesn't always equate with experience.
Well, that's very true, and I think that's one of the reasons why I stepped in the gap in the interim, so that we could have people who are quite keen with new ideas, and new brooms do sweep very clean. So you have people coming on board who have new ideas, who believe that there's a direction in which the party ought to go, that they want to be able to bring their thoughts and their ideas into being. However, it's important that they have the opportunity to strategize effectively, and so I'm here on an interim basis.
It's going to be quite difficult for any new leader, isn't it, for the OBA, because you're still a relatively young party.
Yes.
And you're still associated with the UBP. You can't really get away from it at the moment. How can a new leader get over that? Well, it is the perception, isn't it?
Well, here's what's very, very interesting. On the government side, the now government side, you have two former leaders of the UBP, a former member of the UBP, elected member to the House of Assembly.
There are more leaders of the UBP in the PLP now.
And they are, they are accepted that they came out of the UBP camp. And somehow we employ double standards.
But I'm talking about the electorate.
Well, the electorate elected them. So, we employ double standards in Bermuda. It's like, it's fine for you to have been a member of the UBP if you come over to the us, but it's not fine to be a member of the UBP if you stay with them. So, I think that to my mind, it's a question of the requirement for a level of maturity in the process. Respecting people for what they bring to the table, for what they are offering to carry the country forward, as opposed to looking back. However, once in so doing, it's also important to recognize that if you came into an environment in which there was a relative financial stability, and you rent that asunder during your term of office, which is what happened coming in from 1998 and going through till 2012, there was a certain sense of stability of the country. And for the first 4 or so years of the PLP administration under the finance ministry of Eugene Cox, that stability, that steady hand, there was a very smooth transition. And then things happened where the country did not fare as well financially in the ensuing 8 years as they did in the first 4 years of the PLP administration. So I just think it's important that we offer ourselves to serve the people of Bermuda, that we serve them to the best of our ability.
Understood. But put it into context that you're a young party. Mm-hmm. There is a perception of the UBP. Mm-hmm. You were trounced at the last election. Mm-hmm. How can you change people's perceptions, even with a new leader, so that you can get back into power in 4 or 5 years' time?
I think one of the keys, to my mind, is effective communication. I think there was lots of, as I said, a lot of misinformation that had been articulated during the course of the last, since we went into government. There was a directive coming from a former premier at the banquet, at the Labor Day banquet in 2013, I believe it was, maybe 2014, which basically said, there was a big disappointment and you must take back the government by all means, by any means necessary. And so when that is your mandate coming from your leadership within your party, then you do exactly what you're told to do by any means possible, and that's what happened.
But you didn't counter it. So going back to my question, how are you going to get over this perception? How are you going to, with a young leader, I mean, in the sense, the OBA is damned if they do, damned if they don't. You get a white leader, you say, usual suspect. You get a black leader, they say, oh, they're doing that because of the UPP. Yeah. How do you get over that?
All I can say is if people can look at the service that is being given by members of our team and accept the fact that there's no sinister motive, there's nothing behind it other than the desire to serve the country. If that desire to serve comes across and is articulated sufficiently well with policies that support it, and it's acceptable to the electorate, then they will support us. If it's not, then they won't. As I said, we don't govern for the next election. We govern because of the ability to serve the country.
So, any new leader, what does he or she have to do to rebuild the OBA, in your opinion?
I think we do it one person at a time. We do it one policy at a time. We do it by communication. We do it by outreach. We do it by engagement. And all of those things that are just basic political strategies.
Which you didn't do the first time around.
Well, as I said, we came on board in 2012 and it was holy moly, what are we doing with this country? We are sinking. We had debt that was strangling us as a country.
Still is, of course.
And it still is. And what's interesting is that we were criticized for, quote unquote, doubling the debt. But within a month or so of taking the government, the finance minister had to go and borrow money in order just to meet payroll. So the government, small g, through the civil service and the like, had grown exponentially under the PLP. It had become out of control and we couldn't afford to pay for it. So it followed that in order to have the money to pay people that they had hired, you had to find it from somewhere. And to the extent that our current account monies coming in was not sufficient, we then had to make sure that people were still paid. So we borrowed. It's what was required at the time. But I think also having put the SAGE Commission in place and having put Bermuda on a glide path to financial stability with the idea that we would have a balanced budget by the 18-19 financial or fiscal year. I think that the former finance minister made tremendous strides, and I think notwithstanding that people may have said that he was abrasive in his manner, we all can be abrasive at times when you are frustrated that you can't do more for our people.
But just coming back to the OBA, again, specifically, what you're going to have to do is such a large majority enjoyed by the PLP, such a big percentage of the popular vote. The chances are you're looking at 8 or 9 years in opposition, I'd have thought.
If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You recognize that from the time we first had party elections in 1968, it was 30 years before the Progressive Labour Party took over. So if that has to be the lead up to being able to not convince, because that's not the word, to be able to show the concern and the empathy and what is necessary to embrace Bermuda as a country wholly and completely, not just for the black population, not for the white population, but to embrace the country wholly and completely. If it takes that long, then so be it. Which is why I say we should not be governing for the next election. We should not be pandering in order to get through to the next election. We should be able to...
I have to say, you must be the only interim party leader I've ever come across who said we shouldn't be pandering to the next election. Every party wants power.
And you know what? which is probably one of the reasons I've said to people, anybody who knows me, I am the least likely politician because power is of no consequence.
But without power, you can't fulfill your policies.
Power is of no consequence. What is important is service. And I think that we have lost sight of the service aspect. And certain people have chosen power as their focus, as their mandate, as what they are meant to do in order and to achieve it by any means necessary, because that was the instruction they received. Get it by any means necessary. Not win the right to represent people well, but win back power. What I found very interesting is a conversation that I had with one of the, while they were in opposition, a former minister who indicated that the concern that he had for having lost the election in 2012 was the fact that he lost access to his cell phone, his car, and his salary. And I thought, if that is what this is about, then I'm definitely in the wrong business. It's like, it's not about what's in it for me, it's how can I serve you? And that's, I think, what we need to do. If people don't wish for us as a party to serve, then they will choose the people who have different motives.
But you want to position yourself, as you said, whether it's in 4, 5, 9, 8, 9 years, to position yourself to be in a position to go back as government.
Absolutely, and I said it may take that time, and you do it one person at a time.
But if you're sitting behind or next to the new leader, whoever that may be, what advice are you going to give them now how to accomplish that? What are the steps, what's the strategy that's needed for the OBA to become government again?
As I said, we do it one person at a time. We craft policies that we had on the table that we believe to be for the better good, and to be able to articulate those policies. We put them out there. If they resonate, then they will be supported. If they do not resonate, then they'll be rejected. That's the benefit and the niceties of the democratic system. We accept it, we appreciate it, and we understand it. So what advice would I give to a new leader is, above all, to thine own self be true. That is the key. Once you know who you are and how you choose to strategize, then the policies that you want to articulate and that you want to advance will come into play. And at that point in time, they'll start to resonate if the message is correct. I think the key is messaging.
As I mentioned before, the OBA is a relatively young party. You've been the UBP, then it was split to the BDA, reformed to the OBA. Can it survive? Will it survive as the OBA?
I think it will. I think that the party has a different approach towards, to doing things. If people are enamored with the PLP, then we will be there as a minority. And if the PLP do what they did the last time around, and I hope they don't, because let me just say, the key to me and to our team is the success of the country. We put country before party. And it's one of the reasons why I say we didn't govern for the next election. We governed because it was what was best, what we deemed to be best for the country.
But you think the OBA in its present form will survive?
I believe it will. I believe it will. I think that, what good purpose can come out of having either weak opposition or no opposition? That, to my mind, allows a government to run amok with the people's purse, more importantly, but with policies that may or may not necessarily resonate. So, we will hold the government accountable. And the ability to do that as a structured entity, I believe, is critical.
You must be reading my questions. All my interviewees have this habit of coming on to the next question I'm going to ask, which was, how can you be an effective opposition? You've got 12 MPs. Yes. Are you confident that you can hold this government to account? Because that's one of the most important roles the opposition party plays, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In any system.
Well, if you go back in history, and you will recall that at the time when the Progressive Labour Party split with the Bermuda Democratic Party, or whatever I believe was BDP, I think they had 9 members in Parliament of a 40-seat Parliament. So you claw back one policy at a time. and that's what you do. It may be a painstaking exercise, but if you're in it for service and not for power, it really is it's an exercise in satisfaction as opposed to one in futility or frustration.
You mentioned that quote, by any means necessary. What's your strategy, the OPA strategy, going to be in opposition?
In opposition, we will look at those policies that the government articulates that we can support, and we will support them. If there are things that we deem to be inappropriate, we will mention those, and we will just take the government to task. We can't win votes. It's different from the 1917 government that we had, in which we could be outvoted because either somebody didn't show or we ended up having two people who left the party, so you ended up being a minority government, which is not healthy in any democracy.
It's impossible to manage.
Yeah, you can't manage it. But the thing is that we brought forward policies, unless there were things, and I will give the then opposition credit, if there were things that related to Bermuda and its international reputation, they certainly did support the things that were put forward by our government. What they did not do is to appreciate the fact that by our promise to put our people to work, that by them consistently badgering and knocking down every single policy that was put forward, every program that was put forward, that it did not bode well for our people. If anybody can say that, in St. George's as an example, you had a hotel development committed, and what did you have but the members in the East End effectively shooting down that project because misinformation. They're going to take the beach. Well, there was nothing in the Desarroyers contract that was any different in terms of access to the property than existed in the Park Hyatt under the PLP administration. However, this I guess the dishonesty, where if it's right for one, it's got to be right for the other. But their attitude is, I think, no, because I think that, dishonesty perhaps is a strong word.
It's a very strong word.
But I believe it's accurate. I believe it's accurate because when you knowingly give information that you know it to be wrong, but yet you are still willing to continue to share it, there's nothing honorable about that.
It's a very strong statement to basically call them dishonorable as well.
The actions of giving intentional misinformation is dishonest.
How many times do you think that happened?
Look at the comments made about the airport. Look at the comments made about the Desarroyers. Look at the comments made about the America's Cup in terms of the cost of it. Look at we lived it. We lived it on a daily basis.
So why couldn't you get your message out above that?
As I said, our communication and our ability to put that message effectively, we failed. How, why, I don't know. I'm not a communications person. All I know is that as a government, and certainly as a cabinet, we did our very best to be able to run the country and to govern it and to keep it from falling apart at the seams. I have no regrets in retrospect for the job that we did as a cabinet and as a government. I do regret that the disappointments that some of our policies created for our people, I do regret that. There's no question. But, when I was chosen when I was sworn in at Government House as being the opposition leader, the one thing that I was able to recite was a poem that is very dear to my heart, which is called The Test. And a part of it basically says, it takes a man to stand and cheer while the other fellow stars. And that's what we've got now. The PLP has won the government. They've reclaimed the government. We have a responsibility to respect the position that they have, which is something they never afforded to us. And it's not just about being in opposition and badgering and knocking things down. It's about saying, how best can we coalesce and pull the country together? That's what we are about, and that's what I intend to lead until such time as we have a new leader, and that's what I would encourage a new leader to do.
talking about putting the country apart, one of the big issues under the OBA term, and which fell under your ministry, was the Reverend Tweed. You seem to be, I'm assuming that you were referring to the Reverend Tweed when he made a statement regarding Walton Brown recently and his decision to grant an expat status here. I think your quote is, "The minister has lost his moral authority to speak of fairness and Bermudians first, unless to him the connotation of being fair and to consider Bermudians first means first after his favourite expat." I'm assuming you're referring to Reverend Tweed?
Let me just say that in making that statement, I will stand by that statement, we had a court decision that was handed down which effectively said that that matter ought to go back to the minister and ultimately onto the board for the board to decide.
That's what the Chief Justice said.
That's what the Chief Justice said. That never happened chronologically.
So has the Board of Immigration considered it?
No, my understanding is no. So, the thing is that you cannot say that we are held to a standard and then you do something that's entirely different from that standard. So while there were more intricacies involved in the specific case, and I think it's inappropriate to go into any detail respecting it, I just think that when you rubber stamp something and effectively say, you were told to do this, you had to abide by this, but I can do it differently. You interfered as a minister, and you shouldn't have, but yet I can. Somehow it just, it's a dichotomy that we shouldn't...
and this has definitely happened.
Let's just say that, when your cabinet is sworn in on a Friday and that individual is able to be working on a Sunday, and your board meetings were not held during that period of time, you just have to question how, or what the fast track process was. That's all I can say.
Is there anything looking back that you regret about the Reverend Tweed saga?
No, because, I looked at the information that was in the file in front of me. I accept that the judge's judgment was effectively saying that, as opposed to me as the minister giving that final decision, that the board ought to have done it. And I accept that, so it was a teachable moment, and I have no problem with that. But in terms of the facts, I have no regrets. I looked at what was in front of me. I I opined on that basis. And then once that was done, I think that any person who is fair would have come to the same conclusion given the same set of facts. But that's if you're fair.
It's summertime, and I know you're a big tennis fan. You got plans for the summer?
Well, I have for the last 20 plus years been able to go to the US Open tennis in New York, and I'm hoping to be able to at least put a few days in. The reopening of Parliament on the same week of Labor Day, and of course Labor Day is the big time. It's very early, so it's going to be a little difficult to try to manage a good summer vacation, but I'm certainly going to work on it.
Okay, well on that note, thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.